don't know what you want to research, and it's okay to explore new things, either in your PhD or in your postdoc. And so I think that one of the most common misconceptions is that you need to know exactly what you want to research and how, like when you're going in. And really, it's going to not depend on you entirely. It's going to, in large part, depend on the lab. And so when you're doing a training position, whether it be in grad school or even in undergrad or at the postdoctoral level, so where you've done work in one lab and you've earned your graduate degree, and now you're going to go do work in another lab to pick up new skills and that sort of thing, which is what I am on my way to start doing next week. But no matter what case, typically the research that you're doing is going to be dictated in large part by the PI, so the principal investigator or the primary investigator, so like the head of the lab, so that's going to be like your boss. So different PIs have different things that they want to research, and they'll have different research focuses. And so really the biggest part about choosing what you want to research is choosing what lab you want to join. Often what happens is that when you interview to join a lab, no matter at various levels, the PI is going to introduce you to some of the projects that are going on in their lab and some of the open areas of investigation, potential projects that they're looking for someone to help with. And so often they'll give you several different options of different project directions, and so you'll get some say into what direction you want to start out on. But it's not like you can just go into any lab and research whatever research question that you want. It's not just that they're being like selfish or anything, but you are going to be like an employee in their lab, and so your research that you're doing is going to be fitting into the lab's research and the research goals of the lab, as well as like what because those goals are in large part because what those goals are, those are the things that the lab is actually funded to research. So you need to be like doing research that's actually going along with the funding. And so there is various amounts of flexibility. The amounts of flexibility is also going to depend on the lab and the PI and that sort of thing. So although you might have a strict direction to start from, you can often have more flexibility, because when it comes to research, often along the way, what you're going to find is that your research is going to take you into new directions. You can't predict exactly how an experimental path is going to turn out, because you're going to be discovering things along the way, which is one of the awesome things about science, is you discover things that you end up going down pathways you never thought you would go down. And so you end up even learning new techniques that you never thought you would need. And so in my graduate work, I was studying this protein called argonaute. And it's involved in microRNA mediated regulation, so like RNAi and stuff. Much more on that in other posts. But I ended up getting pulled into this path where I was studying a kinase, where I was studying, learning all these different techniques like HDXMS, various other techniques that people in our lab didn't even use. And so these are directions that, you never would have thought of, but I ended up learning so much. And so when it comes to when I was actually choosing to join the lab, this wasn't even the project that I did in my rotation. So how it works in a lot of the graduate programs is that you do rotations in several labs before choosing one that you want to join. And often in those rotations, you'll be working with like a postdoc in the lab who's going, and you're often working on helping them with their project or that sort of thing. And it's not that's the project that you're going to actually do if you join the lab. And so typically you'll meet with a bunch of different people in the lab, as well as the PI, and talk about various different projects that you might be able to pursue. So when you're doing a PhD, you typically have like one project. You might have a little bit of side projects and that sort of thing, but you have this one main goal. And so you're going to have, this is what you're going to build your whole like dissertation around, like your thesis around. You have this main goal, and then you have like aims that you set out in the very beginning, and then you meet with your committee and show that you're reaching these aims and that sort of thing. So it's a very project-oriented thing, where you have this one set project, and because you're in training and learning how to be a scientist and this sort of thing, basically all of your effort is going to be focused on your project. Whereas when it comes to later in, say, your postdoctoral research, you often have a little bit more flexibility but also more responsibility. So it's going to vary from lab to lab, and I'm not exactly sure what the situation will be in the lab where I'm joining. But in the lab that I just left, say, a lot of the postdocs had multiple projects that they were working on, as well as important roles in mentoring students and that sort of thing in the lab. And so it's not so much that you have a single project. You often have like a single main project, but then you can also have like side projects and that sort of thing. And so, for example, like postdocs in my lab can be working on other like side projects for helping out other people in the lab, doing random things with collaborators and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of opportunities even outside of your main research question in order to answer these different questions. Another common misconception is when it comes to choosing your postdoc, that like basically, how do you choose your postdoc and what does it have to be on? And so this was kind of one of these scary things for me when it came to, no one really talked to me about how you go about actually getting a postdoc and that sort of thing. And so really it's just a matter of reaching out to various labs that you find interesting. And so once again, it's not so much that you're choosing, okay, I want to research this exact research question. There are cases, yes, where it's like that, where there is something you want to research, and so you're going to go to the lab where they're working on that question. In terms of choosing a lab, though, it's really about, you want to find a lab that has a good mentor. You want to find a lab that is doing interesting research, a lab where you're going to be able to either learn new skills or have new opportunities or be able to further investigate questions that you're really interested in. Because again, you're not tied to the research that you did when you're doing a graduate program. And so that can be one of the other scary things. You know, you go in and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to research whatever the heck I want. And then you're like, wait, no, I can't just research whatever the heck I want. Which in some ways is kind of freeing because you don't need to know exactly what you want to do. But in some ways it's kind of scary because you can think, okay, well, what am I going to do if I get trapped in a researching something that I don't want to spend my entire career researching? And that's totally fine because you're in the training stage, and so you're not going to be tied back by the research that you start with. And really the PhD, a large part of it is about learning how to research, how to think like a scientist, how to do, how to write, how to do, I don't know, present, how to do all of these various things, how to think critically, how to find look in the literature, what's involved in actually like writing a manuscript, getting a paper through submission, that sort of thing. And so there's these skills that you're going to learn as a scientist in your PhD program that are going to help you throughout your entire scientific career, no matter where that takes you. And so it's having these skills and not necessarily having this textbook knowledge of the field or of the topic that you're researching in. So when you're doing your research project, you become like the expert in that tiny little slice of the scientific field. And so at first, when you're diving into a new project, it can feel totally intimidating because you know that you don't know as much about it as the people in the field. But as you go forward in your research, like at each thesis committee meeting where they're checking up on your progress, you realize that you're starting to know more and more about your project. You're becoming more and more confident. And about this tiny little slice, you're probably the person that knows the most about it in the entire world because you're the person actually physically finding these new things about it and being so entrenched in the literature on that specific topic. And then you like finish that research project and you're like, oh my God, now I need to go, like, now what? And so when it comes to choosing a postdoc, there are different ways that people find their postdocs. And so maybe they're at a conference and they see someone in the field and their research sounds really interesting. Sometimes if you know that there's a specific research question that you want to answer or a specific research field, then maybe you want to look into labs that are in that, researching that thing that you're interested in, and then look and see if they're accepting, if they're looking for postdocs. Because a lot of it, like if a lab says they're not looking for postdocs, it's not necessarily like they just don't want you. It's that you need funding in order to have be able to pay the postdocs and that sort of thing. Other times you're looking to pick up new skills or gain new experiences, and so that was more the case with me. I knew that I wanted to get more chemical biology experience as well as more teaching experience, and I wanted to be in a lab that really had a strong positive mentor and collaborative environment and that sort of thing. And so in terms of the chemical biology, so I've been more focused on biochemistry and structural biology. And so structural biology is looking at the intersection of like what a protein or a molecular complex like protein DNA, protein RNA, that sort of thing, what it looks like, and how what it looks like is tied to how it works. So this like structure function relationship. And I've also like biochemistry, which is looking more at like the biology side of the intersection of biology and chemistry. And I wanted to look more at the chemistry side of that intersection, so more of the chemical biology side. I also knew that I wanted to get more experience with teaching. So my ultimate goal is to become like a professor at a small undergraduate focused school. So really teaching undergrads like their first science, they're giving them their first-hand experiences in the lab. I'm really passionate about that sort of thing, and so that's really my goal. And so in order to reach that goal, I want to get more teaching experience. And so there's this program that I have heard about and I was really interested in called ARACTA, where they pair you up with underrepresented schools, and you get to teach undergraduates at these schools as well as get experience in training for teaching and have various professional educational opportunities. And so I felt that was a way that would be a way to really make a difference and also advance my skills to help make even more of a difference in my future, because that's what I really care about, is helping students learn and succeed no matter what their background, no matter what opportunities they have or haven't had along the way, and really paying it forward for the opportunities that I've had. But anyway, so those things in mind, I went looking into places that had an ARACTA program as well as had research that in chemical biology that I found really interesting. And I came across Denise Fujimori's lab at UCSF, and they do really cool work on things like post-translational modification, so histones and stuff, as well as ribosomes and ribosomal inhibitors, some really, really cool work. And so I reached out, I had a Zoom interview, I met with her, I met with the people in the lab, and it was a really, really great experience. And so I'm super duper excited to start next week. And I don't know exactly where the future will take me, what my postdoc will be exactly like, but I know that I'm going to learn a lot, and I'm really excited about that. And so I should probably feel a little more scared about diving into this new research area, but I know that I have the skills from my PhD. I know how to research, I know how to acquire that like book knowledge that I'll need in order to tackle the project. So even though I'm diving into like a totally new field with ribosomes and chemical biology and all of this, I know that in the future it won't seem as intimidating as it does right now, because I remember how intimidating it felt when I was a PhD student diving into this new field, and now I'm diving into a new field, but I have a lot of more training and a lot more skills at my disposal in order to help me. And so I think that's one of the great things about science, is you can go off in all of these different directions, and you don't have to worry about being tied back. So I'm doing something completely different from what I've been doing in my PhD in terms of field-wise, but I'll be using a lot of the similar techniques, just applying them in different ways and different things like that. So the skills that you have, even though they might not seem like directly relatable, they really are. And you can explore new topics. Another thing about choosing a research, I'm sorry this is kind of like a rambly post, but I keep thinking of all these things that I want to bring up, is that often when it comes to, so I've talked about how your research question is often going to be defined by the lab that you are in. And often that comes to like when you leave the lab, the research that you've done, it like stays in the lab that you came from. And so it depends on the PI, like how flexible they are with this sort of thing. But a lot of times they don't want you to be like going and doing, like keeping going on the research you've been doing or that sort of thing, because it's kind of like the labs, not your personally stuff. And so it's kind of like in a business, like if you were to leave a business, you wouldn't then go work on the exact same thing you did in the business and like follow it up with like all of the stuff about like, I don't know, I don't do businessy stuff, but basically the idea is that you're going to go work on something different, and how different it's going to be is going to depend on things like what you want to do and what your PI wants and what various things like that. But it's probably going to be very different. And so when you choose your postdoc, in this case, this is going to be more of an important decision in terms of the future that you see for yourself doing in research, if you want to go into like a academia position or that sort of thing, because now you need to start thinking about, okay, if you were to have your own lab, what would you want to be researching, and what are the skills that you would need, what is that sort of thing, in order to kind of build up your repertoire, so that when you go and try to say, okay, I want to research this, this, and this, apply for funding and that sort of thing, you have some evidence at your that you can point to say, look, I've done stuff like this before, I have this record of being able to do this stuff, I know what I'm talking about. And so in addition to looking for new skills and that sort of thing, you want to also try to think about what you would like to do long term. But again, the exact research question that you're going to be answering is going to depend on your lab and what the lab wants to do. And it's also, however, that doesn't mean that that's what you're going to be tied into doing in your future, because once again, it's one of those things where you don't want to be like competing with the lab you just left. And so although are you going to be using the skills and that sort of thing, and it might be a kind of similar field that the questions that you're asking, it's not going to be exactly the same. And so this is how we can get things like innovation in science, is that you have this idea where you can learn all of these different things and all these different skills, and they're going to be able to be applied in different directions. And I think that by training in different labs and different fields and all these different things, you can get this really wider perspective, and really be able to think creatively. And so there are benefits and drawbacks to kind of staying more into the field that you know, and just trying to expand within that field, and also like trying new things. But no matter what you choose, it's important that you remember to have fun and remember that it's a learning opportunity, and even when you are like a top-notch scientist, you're still learning. That's what science is all about, is about learning. And so learning how to do science mostly when you're doing your training, and then later you're learning like like making actual discoveries about the science and the molecules and all these different things, and then being able to apply them in new ways. And so I'm really excited about what the future holds, both in terms of my research and my career, as well as the scientific field. And I think that UCSF is going to be a really awesome place where it's a very collaborative environment, and there's going to be a bunch of labs that I'm going to get to learn a lot, and hopefully be able to help teach people too. And yeah, so I'm just really excited about this new step forward, and I'm sorry that this was kind of a long, weird, winding post, as I'm like waiting for my dad to get I'm waiting for my dad to get out of a meeting, and so I'm just like walking up and down the street and talking and rambling. But I just wanted some people have been asking me about choosing research topics, and so really the key I wanted to get out of today's post before I started getting way off course is that the research topic is not necessarily something that you need to know going into your into the lab, but it's going to be, the lab is typically going to give you several options, and then you're going to choose from those options what you find the most interesting. And then even if you choose one of those options, be aware that your project might change. So this can happen at all levels, is that you might start out on one project and then it turns out to be a dead end, or you can't move forward. You might maybe even come back to the project later, but you can't move forward on it at that point. And it's okay if you need to change your topic or if you need to slightly change directions. It's okay to follow if you find something unexpected and you want to follow up on that. Don't feel like tied back because of what you thought you were going to be doing. And don't feel like you're going to be tied to that research question that you originally set out to answer. Remember that science training is about training. And so it's really learning the ability to do science, to think critically, to find the literature, the stuff in the literature, rather than know like everything that's out there in the literature. So rather than being able to recite all these facts, the facts and stuff you can learn from different situations, but it's the actual learning to do science that's the harder part. And that's really the meat of earning a PhD. And I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that I've had. Very grateful for the chance to have more opportunities in the future. And I hope that you all are able to find opportunities to follow your passion as well. And I hope that I can do a small part to help make these opportunities more easily accessible, such as by at least making them seem less scary, by helping explain what's behind all of these various decisions, as well as trying to make it seem like, or trying to tell people like to erase this sort of misconception that you need to know exactly what you want to do before you go in, because that can seem like this, really make it seem very inapproachable, but really I had no idea what I wanted to do going in and to my PhD, and I ended up having a really, really exciting research project, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you to the Lemore Joshua Tour Lab, everyone at CHSL who helped make these opportunities possible. And thank you for Denisa Fujimori for taking me on as a postdoc, and I'm super duper excited to start next week. And so, yeah, so good luck with everything, people. And yeah, so thanks.